They thought he was just another tired man in a hoodie. They didn't know he owned the entire airline, or that this quiet flight would spark a civil rights revolution. The boarding door was nearly closed when Kadeem Warren stepped into the cabin of Aurora Air Flight 2375. The air smelled faintly of jet fuel and polished leather, the signature scent of first class. He moved with the steady calm of someone who had been in 100 boardrooms. But tonight he wasn't wearing a suit, just a black hoodie, dark denim, and running shoes. Clothes chosen deliberately, not carelessly. His boarding pass read Seat 2A, a window seat on the left side. A small comfort after 3 days of back-to-back investor meetings, endless PowerPoints, and too many rooms where he was the only black man present. This flight was supposed to be silent recovery. 2 hours of quiet before tomorrow's board session in Los Angeles. But someone was already in his seat. She was blonde, elegant, legs crossed at the ankle with the poise of someone who had practiced it for years. Madeline Pierce didn't look up from her phone at first, her manicured fingers scrolling lazily through luxury real estate listings. Her designer tote bag occupied the seat next to her like a territorial flag. Kadeem paused, just long enough for the nearby passengers to notice. A few heads turned. A man in 3B cleared his throat and quickly pretended to check his email. "Excuse me," Kadeem said, voice smooth but firm. "I believe there's been a mistake. 2A is my seat." Madeline finally looked up, her blue eyes cool, assessing, the kind of look that measured a man's worth before he even spoke. "Oh," she said, with the sort of condescension that floated effortlessly from people who had never been told no. "I'm sure we can work something out. Perhaps you could find another seat. I've already settled in." The words were polite on the surface, but underneath them was something sharper. "You don't belong here." Kadeem felt that familiar tightening in his chest, the one that came every time he was quietly asked to justify his presence. In graduate school seminars, in corporate boardrooms, even on golf courses where he had paid the same membership dues as everyone else. He took a breath, slow and steady. "Ma'am, this is 2A, he repeated, showing his boarding pass. "I'd appreciate it if you could check yours." Her smile turned faintly amused. "I'm a platinum guest with Aurora," she said, as if that explained everything. "They know my preferences. I'm sure there's been a mix-up, and I really do need a window seat on the left side for my connection in Los Angeles. The view helps with my nerves." That last sentence landed like a challenge, as though his needs were optional and hers were law. Behind them, the cabin grew quieter. Even the flight attendant, Clara Evans, hesitated in the galley, sensing trouble. The other passengers performed the polite ritual of avoidance, staring into phones, flipping through magazines, pretending not to listen. Kadeem glanced at his watch, a Patek Philippe, understated, hidden beneath his sleeve. He could feel the minutes slipping away, feel the rising hum of something bigger than a seating dispute. "This is my assigned seat," he said quietly. Madeline's laugh was sharp, brittle. "My dear, you're taking this very seriously. This is first class. People don't usually dress." She let the words trail off, letting her eyes sweep deliberately over his hoodie, his sneakers. Kadeem didn't flinch. He had heard this tone before, the subtle suggestion that his presence was a mistake, that comfort came with conditions for people like him. The attendant finally stepped forward, her professional smile fixed like porcelain. "Good evening, sir," Clara said, holding out her hand for his boarding pass. She examined it carefully, frowned, then glanced at the seat number above Madeline's head. "It does appear that 2A is assigned to Mr. Warren," she said slowly. "However, Mrs. Pierce is one of our most valued frequent flyers. Perhaps we could seat you in 3C. It's an aisle seat with extra legroom, and I'll be happy to offer complimentary service for the inconvenience." Kadeem almost smiled at the word. Inconvenience. That was what they always called it. The polite term for asking him to step aside so someone else could be more comfortable. "Thank you," Kadim said, his voice still calm. "But I'd like to sit where I'm assigned." The cabin's air seemed to shift. Martin Alvarez, the captain, appeared briefly from the cockpit, his pilot's cap still in hand. "Everything all right here?" Clara quickly explained, careful to keep her voice low. Martin's jaw tightened as he considered the options. "Let's not delay departure," he said finally. "Mr. Warren, if you could take the alternate seat, we'll be on our way." There it was, the subtle pressure to be reasonable, to keep the peace. Kadim straightened, meeting Martin's gaze. He could feel every eye in first class watching, the weight of 100 silent judgments pressing against him. In his backpack was a laptop containing contracts worth millions, hiring plans that would create jobs in 6 cities, strategic notes that could move entire markets. But none of that mattered right now. Right now, to them, he was just a man in a hoodie making trouble over a seat. "No," Kadim said quietly. "Not tonight." For a moment, silence held the cabin in its grip. Then Madeline's voice cut through it, sharp as broken glass. "This is absurd. He's obviously trying to make a scene, probably hoping for some kind of upgrade or free voucher." The accusation landed like a slap. Somewhere in row 4, someone gasped softly. Kadim didn't raise his voice, but something in his tone changed. A new gravity that made people look up from their phones. "Mrs. Pierce," he said, using her name deliberately. "I'm not running a scheme. I'm not looking for compensation. I'm simply asking to sit in the seat I paid for." She opened her mouth to retort, but something in his calm stare made her falter. What she, and everyone else on this plane, did not know was that 3 years earlier, through a series of strategic acquisitions, Kadim Warren had become majority owner of Aurora Air. 62% of this airline, from the wings to the reservation system to the very seat she was refusing to leave, technically belonged to him. He had learned long ago that power revealed people's true character. And tonight, Seat 2A was about to reveal everything. The aisle felt narrower now. The soft hum of the aircraft became deafening, as if the cabin itself was holding its breath. Madeline Pierce was no longer smiling, her lips pressed into a tight line. "You're making a scene," she said coldly, her voice carrying just enough to let the entire cabin hear. "People like you—" She stopped herself, but the words had already sliced through the air. Kadim heard the quiet intake of breath from someone in row 4. The phrase was never finished, but its meaning hung there, poisonous and heavy. Behind him, a young man coughed nervously and looked away. A woman gripped her wine glass tighter. Nobody wanted to be here, in this moment where politeness had broken down and something raw and ancient had stepped in to take its place. Clara Evans, the flight attendant, tried again, her voice trembling under the practiced calm of hospitality training. "Sir, please, just this once. We can have you settled in seconds if you'll just take 3C. For a heartbeat, Kadim considered it. He thought of tomorrow's board meeting, of the decisions waiting on his desk that would change markets. He thought of the quiet he had wanted on this flight. But then he remembered every boardroom where he had been mistaken for the intern. Every cab he had struggled to hail while colleagues walked past unchallenged. Every time a security guard had asked for his badge twice when he stayed late at his own company headquarters. Not tonight. Kadim's hand moved to the pocket of his hoodie where his phone waited. A single press of his thumb unlocked a world very few had ever seen. On the screen glowed a sleek black interface with the logo of Ether Systems at the top, a private control panel used only by the company's highest executives. He turned the screen just enough for Clara to see. "Do you know what this is?" he asked softly. She blinked, confused. "No, sir." "This," Kadim said, his voice low but clear enough for the first-class cabin to catch every word, "is the executive override panel for Aurora Air." A ripple went through the cabin, soft gasps, startled glances. Even the captain, standing a few feet away, straightened as if bracing for impact. "You're bluffing," Madeline said, but there was a quiver in her tone now, a thread of disbelief unraveling into fear. Kadim tapped once. A confirmation screen lit up. "CEO override, return to gate." For a long moment, no one moved. Then the cockpit radio crackled. "Flight 2375, a crisp voice from the tower said. "We are showing a CEO directive on your flight record. Please confirm you are returning to Gate 12 immediately." Captain Alvarez stared at Kadim, then at the glowing screen, then back at the passengers who were now fully alert, phones raised, recording every second. "Tower," the captain said slowly, keying his mic. "Confirmed. Returning to Gate 12. The engine's pitch shifted as the aircraft left its spot in the departure line. Madeline's confident posture collapsed as the reality of what had just happened sank in. The man she had dismissed as someone making a fuss had just grounded an entire plane. When Kadim spoke next, his voice carried with the weight of history. "Mrs. Pierce," he said, looking straight at her, "you refused to move from a seat that was never yours. You implied that I did not belong here. And when confronted with proof, you tried to turn this into a test of my dignity. That test is over." Madeline opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Kadim rose to his full height in the narrow aisle, and for the first time, his presence seemed to fill the cabin. "I am not just a passenger," he said evenly. "Through Ether Systems, I own 62% of Aurora Air. The seat you are occupying is mine, the plane you are sitting on is mine, and the policy you relied on to shield you from consequences is about to change, forever." Phones were out everywhere now, tiny red recording dots catching every word. Somewhere in the back of the cabin, a passenger whispered, "Oh my God," as though they were witnessing the opening scene of a documentary they would tell their grandchildren about. The jet taxied back to the gate. Outside the windows, flashing airport lights swept across the tarmac like silent search beams. Inside, the passengers sat frozen, caught between fear and awe. Clara swallowed hard. "Sir, what happens now?" Kadim looked at her, and for the first time his voice softened. "Now," he said, "we make this right. Publicly." He turned to Captain Alvarez. "When we reach the gate, no one disembarks until I speak with ground control and corporate. This is no longer a seating dispute. This is a moment of accountability." The captain hesitated, then nodded, understanding that whatever this was, it was much larger than a flight delay. As the plane rolled to a stop, Kadim felt his phone vibrating non-stop. Messages from his assistant, his communications director, even journalists who had somehow already heard what was happening. A trending hashtag glowed across his lock screen. #Aurora Air. The revolution had begun. When the jet bridge locked into place with a metallic hiss, the cabin lights came fully on, flooding the space with sterile white clarity. It was as though the aircraft itself had become a stage, every passenger now an unwilling actor in a drama that had outgrown its script. The first person to speak was not a crew member, but a passenger, a tall man in a gray blazer sitting in 3D. "Sir," he said carefully, "I don't know who you are, but whatever you just did, half the internet is talking about this flight. I'm getting alerts on my phone. People are watching." He was right. Notifications lit up screens across the cabin. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. The story was already spilling into the outside world. Someone had tagged the live stream with the words, "Black CEO grounds own airline." Madeline Pierce's face had gone pale. Her hand moved toward the call button again, but it was too late. The sound of hurried footsteps echoed from the jet bridge. The curtain to the galley swished open, and in stepped Sofia Navarro, a journalist with the Chronicle who had been seated farther back in the cabin. She held up her press badge like a sword. "I've been observing since boarding," Sophia said, her voice calm but cutting, "and I think we should be very clear about what's happening. A paying passenger with a valid boarding pass has been told to give up his seat for someone who cannot produce the same. That passenger happens to be black. The woman refusing to move happens to be white. That's not just a seating error, that's discrimination." Her words hit like a gavel. A murmur ran through the cabin, not loud, but unmistakable. Several passengers nodded. The silence of complicity had been broken. Madeline bristled, the old confidence flaring. "This is absurd. You people are blowing this out of proportion." The phrase landed like a gunshot. This time, several passengers audibly gasped. Even Clara, the flight attendant, winced. "You people," Sophia repeated slowly, as though tasting the words. "I want to make sure I quote you accurately. You said that to a black passenger who simply asked to sit in his assigned seat?" Madeline's cheeks flushed crimson. "That's not what I meant," she protested. "I was talking about journalists, about—" "No," Kadeem said, his voice level, almost quiet. "You were talking about me, and every person who looks like me." The cabin fell utterly still. Every phone was up now, every camera catching the moment. Somewhere in the back of the aircraft, a college student's live stream chat ticked upward past 10,000 viewers. Hearts and shocked face emojis filled the screen. Clara's radio crackled with the captain's voice. "Ground control is asking for an update on the situation." Clara hesitated. "Sir," she said to Kadeem, her voice barely above a whisper, "this is going to be very public." "That's the point," Kadeem replied. He stood in the aisle, steady despite the eyes on him. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice resonant now, carrying to the back of the cabin, "what just happened to me happens to thousands of people every year. People who are told, politely, quietly, to be flexible, to move, to disappear." He let the words hang. The cabin listened. "In this case," Kadeem continued, "I have the power to do something about it, and I will. But I want you all to understand this is bigger than me, bigger than this seat. This is about whether we still live in a world where some passengers are seen as rightful customers, and others are seen as intruders." There was a shifting in the cabin now, as if the passengers themselves were changing shape. Some sat up straighter. A man in row 4 folded his arms and nodded. Even the captain had emerged from the cockpit to stand behind Clara, his expression complicated, part caution, part reluctant respect. Madeline's voice was suddenly small. I didn't know who you were." Kadeem turned to her. "That's exactly the problem," he said softly. "You didn't know who I was, so you decided who I must be." A single tear slipped down Madeline's cheek, but no one moved to comfort her. This was no longer her stage. From the jet bridge, more figures appeared. Airport operations staff, security personnel, a representative from Aurora Air's corporate office already on a phone call with headquarters. The entire scene was becoming an impromptu tribunal, and Kadeem stood at the center. A man in a business suit whispered to his companion, "This is history." And perhaps it was. For in that narrow fuselage, lit by unflattering LEDs, something rare was happening. The truth was being spoken aloud in real time, recorded by 100 cameras, broadcast to an audience far beyond the runway. Kadim's phone buzzed again. A text from his assistant. CNN calling. They want a statement. Another. Board members watching live stream. PR preparing a holding release. Aurora Justice trending #2 worldwide. He exhaled slowly. The moment was no longer his to escape. It had become his to define. He turned to the captain. "When we open these doors," he said, "I will be the first to step out. And when I do, there will be cameras, reporters, questions. I intend to answer them, not as a passenger, but as the owner of this airline." Martin Alvarez, the seasoned captain who had spent 30 years flying, gave a single nod. Understood. As the aircraft door opened with a hydraulic sigh, the sounds of the terminal flooded in. Voices, camera shutters, the low electric murmur of a crowd gathering just beyond the gate. The passengers held their breath. And then, Kadim Warren stepped forward into the light. Gate 12 was no longer just a boarding area. It had transformed into an arena, a pulsing circle of cameras, microphones, and strangers with phones raised high. The passengers of Aurora Air 2375 stood just inside the jet bridge like witnesses in a trial, their faces pale with the weight of what they had just seen. On the far side of the crowd, a row of reporters had already gathered, some local, some national, tipped off by the live streams that had gone viral in less than 20 minutes. Their voices were urgent, overlapping. "Mr. Warren, is it true you grounded your own plane? Was this racially motivated? Are you seeking legal action?" Kadim Warren stepped forward, the overhead fluorescence shining on the dark hoodie that had started everything. He did not flinch from the lights or the microphones. His presence was quiet, commanding, as though the chaos around him bent itself into order. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice calm but carrying easily over the crowd, "my name is Kadim Warren. I am the CEO of Ether Systems, which owns 62% of Aurora Air. Tonight I exercised my authority to ground Flight 2375. The words rippled through the gate area like an electrical charge. Camera shutters clicked in a rapid staccato. Madeline Pierce, standing several feet behind him, sank into a chair and covered her face with her hands. "I did not do this to make a scene," Kadim continued. "I did it because what happened on that aircraft happens to too many people who don't have the ability to fight back. I had a confirmed seat, seat 2A, and I was asked to give it up. Not because of a system error, but because someone decided that my presence there was a mistake. That is not customer service. That is discrimination." Gasps moved through the onlookers. Someone near the back of the gate clapped softly, and the sound seemed to give others permission to react. A smattering of applause rose, hesitant but growing. A woman in a Navy power suit stepped forward. Rebecca Holt, Aurora Air's VP of Operations. She looked like someone used to containing fires before they burned too bright. "Mr. Warren," she said, "Aurora Air takes all customer concerns seriously. We are prepared to launch an internal review." "No," Kadim said, cutting across her words with quiet finality. "Not an internal review. Not another document that ends up buried in a file cabinet. Tonight is the last time Aurora Air will ask the person harmed to quietly compromise so the person with privilege can remain comfortable." Rebecca's practiced corporate mask faltered. "Sir, with respect—" "We have procedures." "Then change the procedures," Kadim replied. "Effective immediately, Captain Alvarez and Flight Attendant Clara Evans are suspended pending investigation. Every Aurora Air employee in a customer-facing role will undergo mandatory anti-bias training within 60 days. And every discrimination complaint filed in the last 5 years will be reviewed and published in a transparent report." Reporters scribbled furiously. Somewhere in the crowd, a phone dinged with a news alert. "Aurora Justice now #1 worldwide." Rebecca's eyes widened. Mr. Warren, these actions have contractual implications. Union approvals. Kadim turned to face the cameras directly. Then we will renegotiate the contracts, because this stops tonight. The terminal seemed to hold its breath. Even the distant announcements of connecting flights sounded muted, as if the airport itself knew history was being written in real time. A young woman with a press badge, Sophia Navarro, spoke up from the front row of reporters. Mr. Warren, are you suggesting these changes will apply to all airlines that use Ether System software? Kadim's expression hardened, and for a moment the weight of what he was about to do was visible on his face. Then he nodded. Yes, he said simply. Ether Systems powers the reservation and passenger management systems for 70% of commercial airlines in North America. Starting tonight, we will integrate real-time bias reporting into those systems. Every complaint will be tracked, escalated to corporate level, and resolved transparently. No more burying them in local offices. No more labeling discrimination a misunderstanding to protect profits. The gate exploded with sound, reporters shouting questions, passengers gasping, phones capturing every angle. Madeline Pierce finally lifted her head, her eyes rimmed red. "Mr. Warren," she said hoarsely, "I am sorry. I didn't know." "That I was a CEO?" Kadim asked gently. "That I could fight back?" She swallowed hard. "I never meant to." "That," Kadim said, "is exactly the point. You didn't think you meant harm, but you were willing to strip someone of dignity because you believed your comfort mattered more than their rights. That is harm, Mrs. Pierce. Whether you meant it or not." The words hung there like a sentence. From somewhere behind the reporters, a low cheer went up. A man in a mechanic's jacket, obviously an airport worker, called out, "About time someone said it!" Others joined. Not loud, not raucous, but steady, like the first drops of rain before a storm. Kadim raised a hand and the noise subsided. "This isn't about revenge," he said. "It's about setting a new standard, not just for Aurora Air, but for every airline that does business with us. Tonight was a test, and we are going to pass it. Together." In that moment, something shifted. The reporters stopped shouting and started writing with a kind of reverence. The passengers who had been bystanders now stood a little taller, as though they too had been part of something worth remembering. Rebecca Holt glanced at her phone, then back at Kadim. "Corporate is on the line," she said carefully. "They want to know how far you intend to take this." Kadim turned to face the cameras once more, his hoodie still zipped, his presence as unshakable as the tarmac beneath their feet. "As far as it takes," he said. And with that, the man who had boarded Flight 2375 simply wanting a quiet window seat became something far larger, the face of a movement. By the time Kadim Warren stepped beyond Gate 12, the terminal had transformed into a press room. The glow of phone screens was everywhere, little constellations lighting the faces of travelers who had stopped mid-journey to witness history. Somewhere overhead, the airport PA called for passengers on other flights, but nobody moved. Kadim stood beneath the harsh white lights of the gate area, hoodie still zipped, posture unshaken. Before him, microphones bristled like spears. Beyond them, the eyes of a nation waited. Live feeds streaming to millions who wanted to know why a flight had been grounded by its own owner. "Mr. Warren!" a voice shouted. CNN, he thought. Why ground the aircraft instead of letting the airline handle it quietly? Kadim's reply was measured, but his words carried like thunder. Because quiet is how injustice survives. If this had stayed quiet, Mrs. Pierce would have gone on believing that her comfort mattered more than my rights, and Aurora Air would have filed my complaint under resolved without changing a thing. This was never about one seat. This was about who belongs in first class, in every sense of the word. A murmur of approval rolled through the onlookers. Reporters leaned forward, pens scratching furiously. Another question. Are you accusing Aurora Air of systemic racism? I'm accusing an entire industry of pretending these incidents are rare, Kadim said. They're not. They're routine, but they're invisible because most people don't have the power to fight back. Tonight, I had that power, and I used it. A cheer went up somewhere near the back of the crowd, hesitant, then swelling. Kadim didn't smile. The moment was too grave for victory laps. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, holding it up for the cameras. The Ether Systems executive panel glowed on the screen, still showing the CEO override, gate return confirmation. This isn't a toy, he said, his voice low, dangerous. This is the same control panel that reroutes aircraft when there is a fuel leak or a security threat. Tonight, the threat wasn't mechanical. It was moral. Silence fell, heavy and electric. Behind him, Madeline Pierce sat hunched in a chair, mascara streaking her cheeks, a portrait of collapse. Even she seemed to understand that this was no longer about her. She had become a symbol, an unwilling antagonist in a story that was spreading like fire across every news feed. Rebecca Holt, the VP of Operations, tried to step forward again, but Kadim's hand went up, stopping her. Mrs. Holt, he said, turning back to the crowd, has offered to conduct an internal review. I have declined. Instead, I have instructed Ether Systems to immediately begin an audit of every discrimination complaint filed with Aurora Air in the last 5 years. The results will be published in full, without redaction. Gasps. More scribbling pens. A man near the gate counter whispered, "This is going to shake the entire industry." Kadim wasn't finished. And to every airline executive watching this right now, he continued, his gaze steady on the cameras, know this. Within 30 days, Ether Systems will update its software to include real-time bias reporting. If a passenger files a complaint, it will bypass local management and go straight to corporate. No more burying. No more protecting the brand instead of protecting the person. Somewhere in the terminal, a cheer broke out. Phones tilted upward as though trying to capture the moment from every angle. Kadim's phone buzzed again, this time a call. He glanced at the screen and saw the name, CNN Newsroom. He pressed the speaker button. This is Warren. Mr. Warren, this is Jake Tapper. We're live in 5 minutes. Will you speak to the nation? Kadim looked at the crowd before him, the passengers, the crew, the woman whose refusal to move had triggered all of this, and then at the dozens of phones broadcasting him to the world already. I'm already speaking, he said, his voice calm, implacable. But yes, put me on. The terminal went silent as Jake Tapper's voice came through the speaker. Mr. Warren, can you summarize what just happened on Flight 2375? Kadim's eyes didn't leave the cameras. What happened is simple, he said. I was treated as a trespasser in a seat I had paid for because I was a black man dressed for comfort instead of ceremony. I was asked to move so that a white woman could remain undisturbed. When I refused, the airline tried to make me the solution rather than the victim. That stops tonight. The terminal erupted. Reporters firing questions, passengers cheering, some wept openly. Even Clara, the flight attendant who had tried to defuse the conflict, covered her mouth with her hand, tears streaming silently. This is no longer about me, Kadim said into the phone. It's about the next passenger who looks like me. The next child who boards a plane and learns too soon that dignity has a dress code. The next person told to step aside so someone else can feel more comfortable. This ends here. The words seemed to hang in the air like a verdict, and the world, for one rare moment, listened. By the time Kadim left the terminal, night had fallen, but the airport was glowing brighter than day. Satellite trucks lined the curb. Camera booms tilted toward the glass doors, and a sea of reporters waited behind security barricades. His phone was a storm of notifications, trending hashtags. #Aurora Justice, #Seat2A, #Kadeem Warren, flashing one after another. Clips of the confrontation already had millions of views. One headline read, "Black CEO grounds his own flight after being denied seat." Sparks nationwide debate. The boardroom was calling too, literally. Kai, his assistant, caught up with him just outside the terminal, tablet in one hand, phone pressed to his ear. "Kadeem," he said breathlessly, "I've been fielding calls from half the Fortune 500. The Ether board is convening in 90 minutes. The market's reacting. Aurora's stock is down 11% after hours, but Ether's is up nearly 10. Investors are calling this a leadership moment." Kadeem absorbed the words in silence. His reflection stared back at him in the glass doors. Hoodie, travel-worn sneakers, the man who had just turned a routine flight into a civil rights flashpoint. "They want to know if this is going to be your official position," Kai continued. "Not just about Aurora, but about the whole industry. They want to know if you're about to pick a fight with every airline on the continent." Kadeem looked past Kai, past the cameras, toward the dark horizon where the runways stretched like black rivers under the lights. "Not a fight," he said. "A reckoning." Inside a secure conference room, half a continent away, the Ether Systems board was already awake and watching the live stream. Some faces were pale, others tight with apprehension. "Kadeem," the chairman's voice crackled through the speaker, "we respect your leadership, but what you're doing, this is precedent-setting. You're about to turn a personal incident into a corporate manifesto." "It stopped being personal the moment the cabin filled with cameras," Kadeem replied. "The world is watching us. If we try to make this go away quietly, we'll be complicit in the same silence that allowed it to happen." A pause. Then, slowly, "You have the board's support. But understand, the entire industry will push back. You may trigger lawsuits, regulatory reviews, even government hearings." Kadeem allowed himself the smallest of smiles. Good. It's time they had hearings about something that matters. Back in the terminal, the crowd had grown. Travelers from other flights gathered near the barricades, whispering, filming, waiting. When Kadeem reappeared, a cheer rose. Not the wild cheer of a celebrity sighting, but the raw, uncoordinated sound of people realizing they had witnessed a turning point. A man in a business suit shouted from the crowd, "I was in row 5. He told the truth. Every word." Others added their voices. "I saw it too. He didn't raise his voice once. She wouldn't even look at his boarding pass." The noise became a chorus. Eyewitnesses giving testimony to a world already watching through 100 live streams. Sophia Navarro. The journalist from the plane raised her recorder. "Mr. Warren," she called, "what happens next?" Kadeem turned, the cameras catching the set of his jaw, the steadiness in his eyes. "What happens next," he said, "is that Aurora Air will not be the same airline tomorrow morning. And if I have anything to say about it, neither will any other airline in this country. Tonight was not an inconvenience, it was a diagnosis. And I intend to treat the disease, not just the symptoms." The reporters pressed closer. "Does this mean legislation? Are you planning lawsuits? Will you testify before Congress?" "All of the above, if necessary," Kadeem said. "But first, we clean our own house. Tonight, I've instructed Ether Systems to suspend the crew involved, launch a full audit of every discrimination complaint on file, and design a bias prevention program that will become the most rigorous in the industry. Then we roll it out, not just here, but across every airline that uses our technology." The terminal erupted. Flashbulbs, cheers, shouted questions. Someone live streaming whispered into her mic, "This is the Montgomery bus boycott for the jet age." Kadeem let the noise crest, then raised his hand. The crowd quieted. "This isn't about punishing one woman," he said, glancing briefly toward Madeline Pierce, who sat slumped in a corner, mascara-streaked and silent. "This is about making sure the next person never has to wonder if their dignity depends on someone else's permission." That night, footage of Gate 12 ran on every major network. Cable news panels debated it. Civil rights leaders called in. Airline executives huddled in emergency meetings. Hashtags surged, petitions launched, late-night hosts cracked jokes about the CEO who grounded his own plane. But beneath the noise, something deeper stirred, something that couldn't be laughed away or forgotten when the news cycle moved on. A single man in a hoodie had forced a billion-dollar industry to look itself in the mirror, and the world was asking, "What are you going to do about it?" Dawn came gray and cold, but the world was already wide awake. By 6 a.m., every major network had the same lead story. CEO grounds own airline after discrimination incident, demands industry reform. The video from Gate 12 played on a loop. Kadeem standing in his hoodie, the glow of camera phones around him, saying words that sounded less like a press statement and more like a verdict. "This stops tonight." Stock tickers rolled crimson. Aurora Air fell another 8% in pre-market trading. Competitors' shares dipped too, as analysts warned that systemic risk had just entered the airline sector. But Ether Systems stock surged, its value climbing by billions overnight. In living rooms across the country, people watched over their morning coffee. Some nodded grimly. They had lived this story themselves, only without the cameras or the power to fight back. Others raged on talk radio, calling it overreaction, proof that cancel culture had taken to the skies. The country had taken sides. In a suite overlooking downtown Chicago, Aurora Air's executive team sat in a hastily convened war room. Screens on the walls showed live coverage from CNN, Fox, BBC. Even Al Jazeera had picked up the story. "This is untenable," said one executive, flipping through printouts of social media metrics. "We have to get ahead of this before we lose every corporate client and loyalty program member we have." Rebecca Holt, who had been at Gate 12, sat at the head of the table, pale but composed. "We aren't getting ahead of anything," she said quietly. "We're already behind. Kadeem Warren isn't just threatening to reform Aurora. He's about to rewrite the rules for every airline in America, and the public is cheering him on." The room fell silent. "Then we have no choice," the CFO said grimly. "We work with him, or we prepare for war." Meanwhile, in Washington, a junior senator from Georgia went live on MSNBC calling for congressional hearings into discrimination in air travel. Within hours, 3 more senators echoed the demand. The Secretary of Transportation issued a statement promising to review federal guidelines on passenger rights. What had started as a single argument over a window seat had become a policy issue. Kadeem stood in his hotel room, tie loose around his neck, staring at 3 muted TVs running 3 different networks, all covering him. Kai stood at the small table, tablet glowing with data. "Here's where we are," Kai said, scrolling rapidly. "Your name is trending #1 worldwide. You've been invited to testify before the Senate Transportation Committee next month. Aurora's legal team has requested an emergency call, and—" He hesitated, then turned the tablet toward Kadeem. A photo filled the screen. A grainy shot of Kadeem stepping off the plane, hoodie up, jaw set. The headline read, "From Seat 2A to Civil Rights, the Face of Airline Reform." Kadeem let the image sit there for a long moment before speaking. "I didn't ask to be the face of anything," he said. Kai gave a small, tired smile. "You didn't have to. The world just gave you the job." At 10 a.m., Kadeem walked into Ether Systems headquarters in downtown Chicago. The lobby was packed with reporters, cameras flashing. Employees lined the mezzanine railings, watching silently as their CEO passed below. In the top-floor boardroom, the directors were waiting. Some looked anxious, others exhilarated. "Kadeem," the chairman began, "the question before us isn't whether you were right. It's whether you intend to lead us into this fight. Because if you do, you won't just be speaking for yourself anymore. You'll be speaking for Ether, for Aurora, for every airline that runs on our systems." Kadeem placed both hands on the table and leaned forward. His voice was steady, almost solemn. "Then let me be clear. Yes, I intend to lead us into this fight. Because this isn't just about my seat. It's about every passenger who has ever been humiliated for not fitting someone's picture of who belongs in first class, or anywhere else. We have the leverage, we have the technology, and we have the eyes of the world. If we don't act now, we may never get this chance again." The room went very still. Then, one by one, the directors nodded. "Then let's make history," the chairman said. By noon, Ether Systems had announced a live press conference for that evening, promising to unveil the most comprehensive civil rights initiative in the history of commercial aviation. News outlets cleared primetime slots. Civil rights leaders booked flights to Chicago. Airline lobbyists flooded Capitol Hill with calls. Social media prepared for another storm. And somewhere in a quiet suburb, a girl watched the news on her phone. A girl who had once been told to leave her assigned seat because a preferred customer wanted it. For the first time, she smiled, because someone, somewhere, had finally refused to move. By evening, Chicago's sky was streaked with fire-orange clouds, as though the city itself sensed what was coming. The atrium of Ether Systems headquarters had been transformed into a broadcast hall. Rows of cameras, spotlights cutting through the air, news crews from every major network elbow to elbow. Kadeem stood behind the podium in his signature dark hoodie, flanked by the Ether board on one side and Aurora Air executives on the other. It was a deliberate tableau. Technology and aviation, accountability and power, all under one roof. The room fell silent when he stepped forward. "Good evening," he began, his voice calm but carrying, the kind of voice that could settle a storm or start one. 24 hours ago, I was a passenger just like any of you. I had a seat. I had a boarding pass. And I had a right to be treated like a person. Instead, I was asked to move, not because of a computer error, but because of a human one, because someone decided that I didn't belong. He let the words breathe. The flash of cameras lit his face in hard white light. "Tonight," he continued, "we are changing more than just one airline's policy. We are changing the standard for the entire industry." A murmur ran through the room, reporters shifting forward, pens poised. "Effective immediately," Kadeem said, his tone sharpening. "Aurora Air will implement a new passenger dignity protocol. Every discrimination complaint will be logged in real time, escalated beyond the local level, and publicly reported in quarterly disclosures. Employees who retaliate against passengers for speaking up will be removed from service. This isn't optional. This is the new minimum." The flashbulbs exploded. Somewhere near the back, a producer whispered, "He's rewriting aviation history on live TV." "And this," Kadeem added, "is just the beginning." Ether Systems will roll out this same protocol to every airline using our software platform. If they refuse, they will lose access to our systems. They will lose the ability to sell tickets, to check passengers in, to fly. The words landed like a verdict. The industry had just been handed an ultimatum. Aurora's CFO stepped forward, pale but resolute. "Mr. Warren," he said for the cameras, "Aurora Air stands with you. We will be the first airline to adopt these reforms." Applause erupted. Not polite applause, but something raw and defiant. It spread through the room like a wave, reporters joining passengers, employees joining executives. Kadim raised a hand for quiet. "This is not about punishing one person or one crew," he said. "This is about building a world where no passenger, no matter what they look like, no matter what they wear, has to fear being humiliated for existing in a space they rightfully belong." On one of the screens behind him, a live feed showed social media reaction exploding. Hashtag Aurora Justice, now trending #1 worldwide, with hundreds of thousands of passengers sharing their own stories. "Tonight," Kadim said, his voice softer now, but somehow even more commanding, "we draw a line. On one side is silence, compromise, and the slow erosion of dignity. On the other side is accountability, transparency, and justice. I know which side I stand on, and after tonight, so will everyone else." The room rose to its feet. Outside the building, the plaza was packed. Travelers, students, activists, airport workers, some holding signs printed just hours earlier, "Dignity is not optional." When Kadim stepped out into the night air, the crowd roared. Flashbulbs popped like fireworks. And somewhere above the city, a plane roared overhead, its navigation lights blinking against the dusk, a reminder of the sky he was trying to change. He didn't smile. The work had only just begun. By the next sunrise, the world had changed. Television anchors spoke his name like a headline, Kadim Warren. Newspapers carried the photo from the press conference, hoodie against a wall of cameras, hand raised mid-sentence, and labeled it the Seat 2A moment. Airline stocks reeled, their volatility flashing red on trading screens. Aurora Air's board held an emergency session before dawn, formally approving every reform Kadim had demanded. Other carriers scrambled to issue their own statements, some promising to review policies, others accusing ether systems of overreach. But the public had already chosen a side. In Dallas, a young mother posted a video describing how she had once been asked to deplane because a first-class passenger complained about sitting near her toddler. In Detroit, a retired veteran recalled being humiliated when a gate agent doubted the authenticity of his military ID. In Los Angeles, a teenager shared footage of a friend being forced to prove he'd bought his own ticket because, as the security officer had put it, "You don't look like you belong here." Their stories went viral, braided together under a single hashtag, #DignityInTransit. By noon, civil rights attorneys were announcing class action lawsuits. Politicians on both sides of the aisle were calling for hearings. Talk radio hosts and late-night comedians debated whether Kadim had gone too far or finally done what no one else had the courage to do. Inside Ether Systems headquarters, Kadim stood at a wall of screens, each showing a different live feed. CNN panels, investor briefings, TikTok reactions, Senate press conferences. The world was no longer just watching. It was responding. Kai entered, his tablet in one hand, his face tense but alight. "They've called you to testify," he said. "Senate Committee on Transportation, 2 weeks from today. And—" he hesitated, then smiled faintly. "The President's office wants a briefing. They're calling this a civil rights moment for the jet age." Kadim didn't look away from the screens. "Good," he said softly. "Then it's no longer just my fight." In a sleek boardroom in Atlanta, executives from 3 competing airlines were holding their own crisis meeting. "He's cornered us," one of them said, slamming a palm against the table. "If we don't adopt these systems, we look complicit. If we do, we let ether dictate our operations." Another executive leaned back, grim. "The public isn't giving us a choice. Every day we delay, the pressure grows. He's forcing our hand. And the worst part is, he's right. Meanwhile, in households across the country, people who had never thought twice about who sat where on an airplane were suddenly examining their own assumptions. Parents explained to their children why this moment mattered. Professors canceled lectures to discuss it. Civil rights groups called it the Rosa Parks moment of commercial aviation. Even critics, who complained that Kadeem had weaponized technology, could not deny that the conversation had changed. Late that night, alone in his office, Kadeem watched a replay of the Gate 12 video. He could hear his own voice saying the words that had started the storm. "This stops tonight." He felt the weight of what came next. The lawsuits, the negotiations, the hearings, the people who would call him hero, and the people who would call him tyrant. But he also saw the faces in the cabin, the older couple in row 4, nodding silently, the young live streamer with tears in her eyes, the mechanic who had shouted, "About time someone said it!" And he knew that backing down was no longer possible. This was no longer just about one flight. It was about rewriting the culture of the skies. The next morning, Aurora Air's website displayed a banner across its homepage. Every passenger, every seat. Equal dignity. The message was clear. The ripples had become waves. 2 months later, the world above 30,000 feet felt different. Aurora Air's planes now carried new placards at every boarding door. Every passenger, every seat, equal dignity. Flight attendants received training that went beyond safety drills. They practiced scenarios of implicit bias, rehearsed how to de-escalate conflict without forcing the most vulnerable person to compromise. Other airlines had followed. Some grudgingly, others proudly, but all of them had signed on. The alternative was losing access to Ether Systems software, a threat too costly to ignore. And passengers felt it. Stories poured in from across the country. A gate agent who stepped in when a frequent flyer tried to bump a teenager from an upgrade list. A captain who personally apologized to a passenger for a biased remark by a crew member. A mother who wrote that, for the first time in years, she boarded a plane without bracing for humiliation. Kadeem stood at O'Hare Airport once again, hoodie traded for a dark suit, but the same steady calm in his posture. He was about to board a flight, not to fight, but to speak at the first global summit on civil rights in transit. Heads of airlines, lawmakers, and activists from 5 continents were waiting to hear how the revolution had begun. As he approached the jet bridge, he paused. The flight attendant scanned his boarding pass, then looked up with a warm, professional smile. No flicker of doubt, no hesitation. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Warren," she said. "Your seat is ready." Inside the cabin, a young girl sat in 2B drawing in a notebook. Her grandmother sat beside her, watching the safety demonstration. The girl looked up as Kadeem took his seat next to her. "Are you the man from the news?" she asked shyly. Kadeem smiled. "I am." She tilted her head. "Mama says you made the airplanes fair." He nodded. "We tried." The girl considered this, then went back to her drawing. "Then I'm going to draw you a crown," she said, "because Mama says only kings can change the rules for everyone." Kadeem looked out the window. The sky was turning gold with morning light, and for the first time since that night at Gate 12, he allowed himself a full breath of peace. When the wheels left the ground, he felt the lift not just of the aircraft, but of something far larger, a movement that had taken on a life of its own. In the seatback pocket, a magazine headline caught his eye. The Warren Doctrine, how one man turned a seat dispute into a global standard for dignity. He closed the magazine without reading further. The story wasn't over, and maybe it never would be. But the world was already flying under new rules. The sky, for the first time, belonged to everyone. Thank you for staying with this story, all the way to its final line. Maybe you felt what Kadeem felt, doubted, dismissed, asked to step aside just to make someone else comfortable. But tonight, you saw it. One person stood up, and when one person stands up, the whole world begins to listen. If you believe that every human being deserves respect, no matter who they are, what they wear, or where they sit, hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell. Because every view, every share, every voice helps this message travel further to someone who needs to know that they, too, have a rightful seat in this world.